Everybody wants to talk about where the Pittsburgh Steelers are, where they're going, and how it impacts the big decision, the biggest decision they have to make all offseason. And I think it's really important to identify where the Pittsburgh Steelers are in the NFL life cycle and just how close they are to being at the top. What's going on, everybody? I'm Noah Strackbine. Thank you for jumping on to Steelers to Go, your daily to-go cup of Pittsburgh Steelers news and analysis. Find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talkers. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. The Pittsburgh Steelers, their biggest news is obviously the quarterback situation and how they're going to handle it, what direction they're going to go. And we continue to talk about it because it's the biggest story that you have to talk about. It is the biggest determining factor of this team's success in 2024. You could look at it and say, well, if Kenny Pickett is the guy, that's great. Or you could look at it and say, you're taking a risk if it's Kenny Pickett. You're taking a risk if it's Mason Rudolph. You're taking a risk if it's Justin Fields. You're taking a risk if it's a first-round quarterback. What direction do you go? What risk is worth taking with the highest ceiling? Because maybe the rest of this team is ready to win and ready to win now. That's where the Pittsburgh Steelers stand. But before you dive into what quarterback situation is best for the Pittsburgh Steelers and how they should handle the entire situation as a whole, it's important to know just where they stand, where their holes are, and how close they really are to being that next team that takes the leap, that competes for the AFC North, that competes for the AFC in general, that tries to out-juggernaut the Kansas City Chiefs and find their way to a Super Bowl. When you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers, you got to look at every piece of the puzzle here. A couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, you were talking about this team is in a rebuild. This team is in a soft rebuild. This team is nearing the end of a rebuild, but it is still missing too many pieces to consider it a truly talented contender, one that can make some noise. And then last year it was, okay, this team has plenty of talent. This team has a lot going on for it. Kenny Pickett looks really good in the offseason. Maybe the Pittsburgh Steelers are a team that are about to make some noise in the regular season and go on a bit of a run. That's where the Pittsburgh Steelers were. But we've reached the end of the Pittsburgh Steelers are a team in the rebuild. We have reached the end of the Pittsburgh Steelers have too many holes to compete, and we have reached the end of this is the bottom of the NFL life cycle, and now we are at the top of the NFL life cycle. That's where the Pittsburgh Steelers are. You could go through their holes and you could say, well, let's identify them. It starts obviously with the offense, and we'll start with the offensive line. You have two holes there, center with Mason Cole, left tackle with Dan Moore Jr. I think a center gets filled this offseason. I don't think there's any question about it, whether it's a second-round pick in Zach Frazier, a first-round pick in Jackson Powers-Johnson, maybe a free agent, depending on what direction they go or how confident they are that they can land a center or top center in the NFL draft. But I still believe that the Steelers have a new man snapping the football in 2024. I don't think that's a question anymore. I think they are ready to move on, and they understand how important the center position is to their offensive line. When it comes to left tackle, you look at Dan Moore Jr. and you look at that position as a whole, and you say, look, there are two options here. Dan Moore Jr. is worst case scenario, but if you have one missing link, one poor link to a chain of offensive linemen, that's okay. And I've been told many a times that Dan Moore Jr. could be the fifth best offensive lineman on a line, and you always need a fifth best offensive lineman. And I think that's where the Steelers stand. They would like to replace him. They would like to have dominant tackles. They understand how important that is in the NFL. But at the same time, if you could replace your center and just have one missing link at left tackle, your offensive line's in good shape. You have an offensive line that you believe in and one that shouldn't really have too many hiccups moving forward because the rest of it is so well put together that you could continue to grow and develop those pieces and hope that it makes up the ground of Dan Moore Jr. Outside of that, you're not worried about anything. If Mason Cole, stays, you have a backup center / swing guard. You have Nate Herbig that you feel very confident in as your backup swing guard, who's only 25, 26 years old at this point. Your offensive line's looking really good. Your backfield, obviously, you have Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. No worries there. No issues there. You have a great backfield. You have a great running back game. Your wide receivers, you need an option 3, but I anticipate Allen Robinson's on his way out, and maybe a guy like Tyler Boyd is on his way in. or a mid-round NFL draft pick that you could continue to develop. Plus, Calvin Austin's going to take a step forward. You got guys like Connor Hayward who will continue to develop in the passing game. Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington. Your tight ends and your wide receivers are totally fine. The Steelers are not sitting around saying they're going to hold us back. They're going to be a big issue. If you got to go into every game saying Deontay Johnson and George Pickens are going to get 10-plus catches, that is not an issue. That is not something that you could sit around and say, that's the reason to hold this team back. That is the reason to ignore things and say, well, we're not where we need to be. No, you are. You have two superstar wide receivers. And even if Deontay Johnson is just bordering the line of a star wide receiver, he's pretty close and close enough to say, well, George Pickens is a superstar, so this is a good 1-2 punch. Again, the offense outside of the quarterback position is great and in a really, really good position to fill the rest of their holes and just say, we're ready to dominate in 2024. That is how close that side of the ball is. You go to the defensive side of the ball, you got a couple more holes, but you could go draft a corner. Boom, you got a corner. Re-sign Levi Wallace. There's your CB3. Get rid of Patrick Peterson and sign another safety or draft another safety. There's your second hole, and then your only one left is inside linebacker. And at that moment, I get it. That's a huge one. But Cole Holcomb, if healthy, played really well last season. And Landon Roberts is a bona fide stud. This guy can do whatever you ask him to do, and the Steelers are going to ask him to do a lot. Those are your two inside linebackers, worst case scenario. And there are options to go draft somebody or to sign somebody young in free agency and say, hey, we're going to add to the room. But when healthy, that inside linebacker room looked good. And if they could stay healthy, which I get is a big if, but how many years in a row can you go where everybody gets hurt all the time? Who knows? Hopefully not more than one. But the Steelers' inside linebacker room looks good. And if they could just add to it, it looks even better. You have options to replace Larry Ogunjobi or add to that defensive line, whether you want to replace somebody or just kind of bulk up. Who knows? But I think either way, that defensive line has a bare minimum line of this is good enough. It's not great, but it's good enough. And that's where the Steelers are in a hole. This team is good enough. This team is out of the rebuild and onto the we need to succeed. This team has done it. It has lived the NFL life cycle. It has gone full circle from we have a franchise quarterback, we have a playoff team, we have all of these future Hall of Famers and Pro Bowlers all around us to everybody left. This team is bad. You're trying your hardest to make the most out of it, and Mike Tomlin did a damn good job of making the most out of it. But they're not going to win anything, and they're not going to go anywhere. Now they're here, and they're saying, this team is put together. This team is literally a quarterback away from being the team that tries to surpass the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, that tries to surpass Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. That's how close the Steelers are. So when you're evaluating the quarterback position, when you're making that option, and I'm not sitting here saying, oh, go get this guy or go get that guy or whatever. I'm just saying that to take it easy, to say, to zig and never zag, you're hurting yourself because you fought so hard. You fought tooth and nail as an organization to climb yourself out of the rebuild without taking a drastic step backwards, without having the 5, 6, 7 years of just complete, utter disgrace of a football team. They did everything they possibly can, and they did it the best way they possibly could to get out of a rebuild, to go through that entire process, keep this team together, and come out on top still fighting. And now they just have a quarterback situation that if they solve, this rebuild puts them in a position to probably go and compete for a Super Bowl and a championship. And if they do it wrong, leaves them exactly where they are right now, which is a 10-win team, a 9-win team, fighting for the playoffs and probably not winning a playoff game because of it. That's where the Steelers are. They are no longer in a rebuild. They are no longer in the bad part of the NFL life cycle. They are a quarterback away from being a dominant football team, and they've done everything else correctly. If they ignore this one, it all goes to hell. None of it means anything. If they do it the right way, if they do it correctly, if they handle the quarterback situation the way that they should, and they go out and they say, look, we are on the verge of winning a Super Bowl, and we should go try to win a Super Bowl, however they believe that's the best way to do that, then this team could go a lot farther than I think people want to realize, and maybe the NFL realizes, because the Pittsburgh Steelers are right there. They're just a quarterback away.